Welcome to another Univirtual Experience. This is a partnership conference and festival with the Virtual World Society and Educators in VR, and we're bringing together experts and innovators in immersive education, disrupting education all around the world. This is day 25 of 30, where we have been bringing you amazing presentations, workshops, classes, concerts, our exhibition hall, all kinds of amazing activity. And before we get started with this great presentation here on the introduction of XR accessibility, one of my favorite topics, I want to thank our sponsors because without them, we could not have this event be open and free and accessible to everyone across over 19 different VR platforms and apps. Talk about accessibility. That's been fun. All right, so HP Virtual Reality and HP Higher Education are our Infinity sponsors. They just released a new edition of the HP Reverb G2, beautifully designed for higher ed with pulse and eye monitoring and tracking and testing and other innovations that are great for precision controls, research, and development. So check out our articles about this on the educatorsinvr.com website, also at hp.com for virtual reality and HP Higher Education to learn more. We also want to thank our Galaxy sponsors, Engage and Advantis Education, who are also changing the face of VR and XR for education. Now, we also want to thank our stellar sponsors, and I'm just going to go through the list really quickly. Our exhibit hall will be open soon. Please stop in and see them. Grove XR, the VR lady, Dr. Angelina Dayton, who's the founder of Students in VR. Frame VR, which is the web-based social creative educational VR platform. Learn Bright, another educational platform that brings you a headset as well. LBX Immersive and Waking Dream XR, and Donna McTaggart of Let's Meet in VR, the event manager and director for Educators in VR, and the Univirtual Experience, and Tony Cube Studio for their generosity of spirit, assisting with the video and live streaming efforts for Educators in VR and Univirtual Experience events. Also want to thank all of our moderators that help make this possible as well. Now, I want to turn this over to Dylan and Joel. I am so thrilled you're here from XR Access. What you do is helping to not just change the face of the web and disrupt, but it's changing hearts and minds when it comes to accessibility and making sure that we have equal access for everyone. So it's all yours. Go for it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laurel. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this lovely, Tuesday morning? Tuesday morning. I'm Dylan Fox. I'm the coordination and engagement team lead for XR Access. This is Joel Ward. Joel, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Joel Ward. I'm also associated with XR Access, and I work with Dylan over the past 2 years since we set it up in 2019. I do work for Booz Allen, but I work in XR, and accessibility is obviously very, very close to me, and I'm really glad we're here to talk about it with everybody.
Mm-hmm. So why don't you take it away, Joel?
Yeah, so everybody's here. Assume either you know what XR accessibility is, or you know what accessibility is, or you're interested in hearing more about it, right? So Dylan, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, right?
Mm-hmm.
So first off, I just want to clarify, we're all in VR right now, or in some version of VR or the desktop app, right? So we're all in ALTSPACEVR. So, and I assume if you're associated with Educators in VR, you've experienced it. I just want to clarify, when we talk about XR, not everybody has necessarily heard the term XR or understands what it means. It also has a variety of meanings depending on who you ask, and there's also other terms used. So when we say XR, it generally means extended reality, and so we're in VR right now, but we also include augmented reality and mixed reality, which are more of the types of XR that are interactive with your world, where in VR, you're totally immersed, and some of you may be in a headset, or some of you may be using VR on your desktop through the AltSpace app. But augmented reality is something like a Google Glass or a Microsoft HoloLens that interacts with your physical world. So just to clarify, like when we say XR, it includes all of those. It also includes WebXR. Again, there's a desktop version of AltSpace, but there's other apps like Mozilla Hubs that are based on WebXR technology that basically it's a 3D world in your browser or on your computer versus putting a headset on. So it's not just limited to having to put a headset on. And I will also add mobile devices can do this as well, either on a 2D screen or sometimes you pop it into a headset. So it's not just putting on a VR headset, it's all of those that are the new ways of interacting with three-dimensional spaces, either in a fully virtual world or a world combined with our physical world. All right. So we wanted to kind of poll the audience. Again, everybody's in here in ALTSPACE, so you have some experience with XR. What other kinds of XR, AR, VR applications are most exciting for the folks here? If you raise your hand, we can call on you. And Dylan, I'll call on you first, actually, to kind of kick this off. What excites you?
Sure. I think there's any number of really interesting applications. One of the things I'm studying right now, and in addition to my work with XR Access, I work at UC Berkeley as a researcher, and we're looking at augmented reality for people with visual impairments, where basically the core idea of it is that we have these new devices like the HoloLens 2, for example, that have all of these incredible sensors and machine vision technologies kind of baked into them. Typically on the assumption that the user can see, and so these are more designed to help make kind of realistic looking behaving holograms and all that. But we realized that there's a huge really untested application for people with disabilities, particularly people with visual impairments, for these to be able to sense what's in the user's surroundings and help communicate that information either through sound, or currently we're researching kind of visual cues that can help people with low vision understand what's in their environment more easily. Also do things like read text, and just do all kinds of things that a lot of people who aren't disabled take for granted. But now with some of these applications of these new technologies, we can make it not only these devices, but the physical environment more accessible for everyone. So that's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart right now. But definitely want to hear from the audience here. We've got a lot of folks.
Well, that's a really open question, because the answer could be Beat Saber. It could be,
Absolutely.
All right. Okay, so if you would like to answer the question that's up on the screen, what applications of XR are you most excited about? Hit the raise hand button. And Eliscolases, I just messed that up. Sorry, it's early morning.
Hi, yeah. Basically, what's happening here now, I'm probably attention deficit of some kind, and I struggle very much with Zoom meetings and Microsoft Teams meetings, because I know there's stuff that I can just glance at. I can check my messages, I can check my email, whereas when I'm sitting here, I'm listening to you guys, and I'm not tempted to do anything else, and that to me is a world changer.
Focus, being able to focus on what's going on. That's a good one. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, beautiful. Kathy Moya, you're up next.
Thanks. I do a lot of events as part of my work. I'm very into, corporate events, business events, getting engineers and customers together. And so when I found ALTSPACE and other platforms as an opportunity for events, because standard video conferencing, you can't have the multiple conversations, you can't have that mix and mingle kind of experience. So I really want to be able to bring people together in the space, but I'm also really concerned about, the equivalent of having an event in a two-story walk-up with no elevator. I have to have events in places that are accessible. So that's why I'm interested in this.
Yeah,
that's
no,
good.
absolutely.
Okay.
I think we have later in the slide some discussion of what, for ALTSPACE, for XR in general, there's definitely some gaps there that we're hoping to address.
Beautiful. One of the things that, thank you, Kathy, one of the things that I'm most excited about is the fact that we have captioning available now. So if you go to your circle with a triangle on it, if you're in 2D and you haven't switched back to the better classic PC controls under settings input, just right-click or escape to have access to find that circle menu. Again, not intuitive, not happy with the new
Yeah.
interface. And go to settings, speech, and you can enable the live captioning not only in English but in multiple other languages. It will instantly translate, and that is something that I have longed for years, combined with the fact that Firefox's browser has just announced that they're going to be integrating instant translation into the browser, something that's been my soapbox for decades, is to make sure to have the browser be responsible for translation instead of it being a third-party tool, because I want a seamless experience with language to be able to read what's going on in Brazil as equally as I do in Russia or in an English-speaking country. So that's a form of accessibility that's critical. And I love, it needs improvement, but I love the fact that we have live captioning here. That's a big deal for me. So what else
Yeah,
is next
yeah,
before,
it's a
and then
huge
we'll
win.
get to more of these, more suggestions from people. What else is next for us?
All right. Well, I think Joel, good. Yeah, go for it.
Right. So we brought accessibility up, and at the beginning, if you heard us chatting with Laurel, we're talking about there's different definitions of accessibility. Coming from XR Access, our focus is regarding ability, right, and making things usable regardless of ability. Accessibility is a human right. Here in the United States, we even have laws that go along with that. But even without the laws, having access to be able to do things is a human right, or it is. And it, around the world, there's different ways that's supported through government. Generally, though, when we say accessibility, it's related to usability, and really accessibility creates better experiences for people of all abilities. And I mean, we always bring up the example of the curb cuts, right? That's often you brought up, where it was maybe designed for people in wheelchairs, but it also is usable for everybody, strollers, etc. So you can design something that it kind of related to the idea of universal design, where it's designed for maybe a special case, but actually that will then help more people than you originally understand. So it's just good practice. Obviously, we should be helping people participate. That's where we come from at XR Access. We were talking at the beginning about other things that are accessible, like is something available to you, right? Which is another, it's again related, but it's sort of another definition of the term. And actually, it's interesting, we're talking about internet access and say rural internet access, or even not even rural places, some places that don't have it, or if you can't afford it, that's an accessibility problem for this day and age, and especially with XR. If you want to have a communication like this and you don't have good internet access, it's not going to work. So it's definitely intertwined. Again, we're more focused on here on more of the sort of physical and emotional sort of accessibility concerns, but it's very much tied to the rest, just the availability of it, so people can actually use it and also provide us feedback on it too. And that's the other thing is, if people aren't using it, and this is kind of been our struggle, is, well, I can't use it, so I'm not going to try it. If I don't try it, I can't tell you what's wrong with it. And if I can tell you what's wrong with it, we can't necessarily make it better, right? So you also need to include people in your process. And I think what's happened with a lot of new technologies is people that are designing and building it are the ones that know how to use it. And so like, well, everybody just understands it. This goes into proper design and development. We need to include people, and that's one of our goals for XR Access is bringing people in to try it and give us their feedback.
Absolutely. And something I'll add to this as well is that when people think about accessibility, particularly with regards to disability, oftentimes they think only about people that have some kind of permanent disability, right? Somebody who is, lost their legs, is in a wheelchair, or somebody who is permanently blind or deaf. But disability is a spectrum, right? Disability is, we've got this chart here from Microsoft Inclusive Design. Disability can be permanent, but it can also be temporary or situational, right? So if you are permanently deaf, that is a form of disability. But if you have an ear infection and are deaf for, 2 weeks, that's also a form of disability. And if you're a bartender in a really loud environment, you can't hear the person next to you ask for a drink, that's also a form of disability. And having these designs account for, people on one side of the spectrum benefits people across the entire thing. So these effects, when you design for accessibility, really do carry out and benefit everybody. And we have another slide here and just a couple more reasons why XR accessibility is important.
Yeah, so I mentioned the curb cut, right? So let me take a step back. The one reason that we're doing XR access is because XR is still in its relatively new stage, and what we have often seen with new technology is things like accessibility are an afterthought and not thought of until it becomes mainstream, and then of course it's a problem. We had that with the web, even though there were efforts in the 90s when the web was new to make accessibility important. It did take some time, right? And so, but we got ahead of it. So we're trying to do the same thing with XR. Well, it's been around for decades in various forms. It's become more popular over the past 10 years with more commercial technology. And as mentioned here, with COVID and using applications like this, a lot more people have jumped into it, especially for social and collaborative uses. And then we've realized, oh shoot, we didn't think about some of these things we should have thought of, like Captions, which a year ago I don't think any platform had Captions. I don't think so, right, Dylan? I don't think anything had it not built in. And now ALTSPACE related to Microsoft has a great ability to kind of do this, but some of the other platforms that were mentioned that they're starting to add this including and actually separate from even XR, things like Teams and Zoom and WebEx and things like that. They realized, oh shoot, we're meeting, everybody's meeting remotely, but we don't have these accessibility features remotely, and we probably didn't even have them in person either. But we need to make sure we're doing that. So it's kind of forced us to do that, but we're trying to get ahead of it with XR before, especially with physical devices. If those are not accessible, once you get them out there, then it's a problem, and that's why some people just don't want to buy them. Is because, oh, I can't use it. So why am I going to buy it if there's not an accessible, if it's not usable to me physically, I'm not going to buy it. So then I can't test it. And so then it's it's just never going to come to fruition if we don't think about it ahead of time. So the other things related to that are equitable access. Again, if we start using this more for education, which here educators in VR, but also work or other things that are essentially required. If accessibility is not thought of, then people can't participate, or they can't participate fully. And that goes actually to the question of, okay, well, I was involved with the web when the web was new, and in the early days as well. It's separate but equal, right? You have you have a separate the back door, right? And this goes into equal rights, right? If that's the answer, that's not a great answer. Maybe it's a workaround if you have to do it, if there's something quickly, but that's really not a good answer. You need to have it. It's part of the platform, part of the experience, and solved ahead of time, not as an afterthought. And that that's what we often run into, or attitudes like that, and I deal with it as well. With, oh well, or they're not asking for it, like our customer, our people are not asking for it. Well, when they ask for it and you haven't thought about it, then you're going to be in trouble. And it's just not it's not good to be in that point at that situation. And then lastly, I mentioned this before, is the curb cut effect, right? And that's an example we always use, right, Dylan? But everybody knows the curb cuts.
For a reason.
And we didn't have them like 30, 40 years ago. I think what it was, the Rehabilitation Act, was it that, or the ADA? Whatever. We had some laws.
John Roberts in Berkeley, right? Is midnight curb cutting squad.
Right. Right. So it's really been the past 50 years or so, a lot of it has really happened here in the US. But a lot of those things like curb cuts and other like ramps and other things like that, again, were brought about because people, say in wheelchairs or with other mobility issues, needed them, but also they're useful for everybody. And so, again, we want to make solutions for everybody, not just one group. And if you just have like a place that has stairs and that's it, it's really meant for one group, the people that can walk upstairs with no problems. So you have to have think about it, like for again, idea of universal design, where you're making it available for everybody, and it just makes it better for everybody.
Right. And that was Ed Roberts. I was thinking of Ed Roberts. It was Roberts something.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I kind of also hinted to this too, right? So when we talk about XR accessibility, we're all here in software, and you may be here. I'm using the desktop app. There's also VR apps for the Quest and the Vive, etc. All of that actually is hardware, right? So your computer has to be accessible, but so does the headset if you're using a headset. And then there's the software side of it. Just because the hardware is accessible, if it is, doesn't mean the software is. If you don't have things like captioning or the ability to change contrast, or the ability to use the controls in different ways, not just using a controller or a keyboard, then that's a problem. There's also the idea of using XR as assistive technology, right? So we're talking about the one side is, okay, you have to use it, or you want to play a game, or you want to participate in this. And if you can't, then it's a problem, right? But it's something you want to participate in, but you can't. So we need to make sure that's the case. But also, XR could be used as an assistive technology. An example, kind of related, is things like XR is used for stuff like therapy, or for people to be able to participate in things where maybe physically they can't travel or have access, but they can participate in XR. I know, Dylan, if you have some other ideas, but basically, instead of, well, obviously we need to make it accessible. That is number one. But also, how could we use the technology to help with accessibility, like actually make experiences that were not possible in other ways?
Right. Yeah, and I think that the key here is that we do want to absolutely see XR, technologies that are aimed at people with disabilities. There's a lot of potentially awesome things we can do in terms of assistance and in terms of rehabilitation, but we don't want to lose sight of the fact that people with disabilities shouldn't only be able to use the software that's explicitly designed for them. They should be able to use all of the software and hardware that's out there, right? So we want to make sure when we're talking about XR access that we're capturing both sides of that, of those kind of use cases, and that nobody gets left behind. We don't have here's all of the mainstream apps that people who are able-bodied can use. Oh, and here's the ones that we made for people with disabilities. But we also don't want to ignore all of the wild things that having these machines with motion sensing and all kinds of other sensors can do when it comes to things like physical rehabilitation and real life obstacle avoidance and wayfinding and all kinds of other things. And then we have two examples, new examples about some of the kind of classic accessibility challenges in XR.
Yeah, so the first one, and we talked about this earlier, is captions. And like I mentioned a year ago, I don't believe any of the platforms like ALTSPACE had built-in captions. There were some hacks in order to get captions in different ways, like having a window or having a translator, but they weren't built in. And now we're seeing that actually in this application here, and actually a lot of them are adding that. But it's still actually a problem in other things like games. A lot of games don't have that at all. And a couple like this is what Job Simulator, right?
Vacation Simulator, yeah.
Vacation Simulator. It's one of the companies that has really been at the forefront of making sure they're adding these accessibility things, despite the lack of standards, right? And this has been the issue, and one of the things what we're trying to help with is get standards out there so people understand how to do this, because right now a lot of places have had to sort of come up with their own design. And there are some tools out there like for Unity that help with that, but again, it's not a standard like for the web. There's standards built into HTML that help with this. There isn't necessarily that built into Unity or Unreal or some of the technologies yet. So captions are one, say relatively easy. It should be one of the first things you probably do to make it accessible to everybody. But a lot of, and I'd say most apps don't have this yet, and that's relatively low-hanging fruit because there are ways of doing this. You just have to know that you have to make an effort to put it in.
Yeah, it is tricky though, because there are challenges with have in VR and XR that you don't have in 2D, right? Because in 2D, you know where the user's focus is. It's on the rectangle that you're showing them the content on. But here in VR, I could be looking this way, I could be looking at Joe, I could be looking, any direction. Where do you show the captions? How do you show who's speaking and what direction the speakers are, right? There's where do you put the captions? You just kind of overlay it on the screen, or do you have it as a 3D object floating in space that can get blocked by other objects in front of it, right? There's some interesting new challenges to consider as well when we're talking about even something as kind of straightforward as captions.
And this,
and then there's also,
so I mean, Dylan,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say this also relates to what you're talking about with your project at Berkeley, right? As we're talking about VR and like VR virtual experiences, but what about the real world? You know, when you get into augmented and mixed reality, and then being able to use some of these technologies in, you know, as you're walking around, but interacting either with virtual things or using this technology to help overlay text for people who might have hearing disabilities, right? And so, and that's what's really interesting here. And the ways of handling that might be different between VR and AR, but they're obviously related. And also, and that makes us think, well, how can we use this technology to aid in accessibility, not just make it accessible? And I think that's maybe the next big jump in what we can do, especially with AR, like what you're doing, Dylan, is very interesting.
Yeah. No, I've seen some research papers on basically algorithms that recognize sounds, real world sounds, you know, like an alarm ringing or people talking, and can basically bring these digital accessibility features into real world scenarios and project the captions of what people are saying on them in the real world, which is kind of phenomenal.
That's cool. Yeah, that's very cool.
So there's tons of opportunities here for sure. And then in addition to kind of old school challenges like captions, there's some new challenges as well.
Yeah, so this goes more into the hardware side of things. How well, hardware and also software, right? So one, you have to be able to put on the devices, but also a lot of especially VR apps are designed for room scale, right? The original HTC Vive, that was the whole idea. You could set up a room and then you could walk around it. Okay, well, that's great. Well, what if you have trouble walking around, or what if you're in a wheelchair, different heights, also limited space. So again, it's not necessarily even just a physical disability issue, but also could be just a space issue. If the applications, the games, the software is not designed to be used maybe sitting or not moving. And actually, funny, I was about to pop into ALTSPACE in my Quest, and I put it on, and I'm in my office here at home, and I can't do room scale really because I don't have a lot of space. And it's like, well, you can't do desk mode. You can't do it in stationary mode. And I'm like, well, okay, I can't do it. I could have walked in the other room and did it, but instead I just popped in here on the web, luckily, or on the application. But it's similar, right? Where you got to think, well, not everybody's going to have the same abilities. So how do you let them participate and move around and participate in the application, even if it's not the default, right? So, and then again, also the controllers, right? If there's issues with controllers or gestures, right? A lot of the things like the Quest now has gestures, and the HoloLens only has gestures by default. What if you don't have the right dexterity to be able to use either controllers or the gestures? How can you participate? There aren't a lot of third-party tools added in, though. A lot of them are now like being able to use a mouse or a controller, right? So there are ways of doing it, but they aren't necessarily either built in or even thought about by the app designers to incorporate them properly, so they don't always work correctly.
Yeah, no, and I think that with the rare exception of studios like Alchemy Labs in the last page, who I think the story is they one of their controllers ran out of battery, and they were like, oh shoot, okay, I guess we'll replace the battery because the app is now useless. And they thought, wait, doesn't that mean the app is useless if you only have one hand?
Right.
But the vast majority of developers don't consider that. And so there are some tools like this tool we've got on screen right now is one called Walk-in VR. That's a Steam extension that lets you simulate things like standing up or sitting down, or using one arm, or holding down a button. Things that, you know, for something as simple as holding down a button while turning around. You know, if you're in a wheelchair, you might need to holster your controllers to turn your wheelchair. So holding a button while you do that is not straightforward. And so really people need to think, both hardware designers need to think about how these hardware devices can be made more accessible, but software as well need to think for people with mobility impairments, how are you going to redesign your controls to support that? Which is something that I think we've very rarely had to struggle with before when we're used to just dealing with keyboards and touchscreens. So lots of new challenges here.
Yep. All right. So with all that, we're curious. We'd like to open up to a question again before we get to our next section. Have you witnessed anyone having trouble accessing an XR experience? And then related, what possible accessibility issues can you think of of XR, maybe that we haven't mentioned yet? And also, what about ALTSPACE?
All right. So
Yeah, like
hit the raise hand button. Let's make sure I'm amplified. Sorry, hit the raise hand button that's down in the lower right corner, and we'd love to hear the answers to this. Okay, so AKA Indian Prince. There you go.
Yeah.
You're on.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. So basically, say anybody has witnessed accessing XR experience a problem. Well, basically, it's me in one sense, because when I fall ill, I'm stuck in bed. And so basically, I'm lying down. So I can't, well, I can move, but I can't, get up and everything like that. So, being in like ALTSPACE or something like that becomes a bit problematic because I'm not standing up and I can't create a safe zone, because I can't map out my stable thingy, because it assumes that you're sitting up or standing and not lying down. Okay, so and that's another thing, and using controllers in that aspect, moving your viewpoint is also very difficult, because I can't move this whole space 90 degrees up and walk around. And I know it sounds really simple, but that's one of the problems I found, because that means I literally have to get up, and at the moment I'm sitting down and watching you. But if I was lying down, I would not be able to see you or anything like that. And that's one of the things. And another thing of problematic for me is that using a controller to do, normal day stuff like typing or stuff like that is absolutely horrendous. So I had to, like, especially even in ALTSPACE, let's see if I can't use a thingy. It's easier to use a mouse moving around than it is using a controller sometimes, because problem of disability and stuff like that. Those are the simple things, but I've kind of solved the problem of the mouse and everything like that, because the mouse, you don't really need to see it, but keyboard you do. So I've managed to somehow wrangle a small camera and stuff like that and overlay it so I can see the keyboard. So I don't understand sometimes where we already have the ability to do this in this physical world, that can't, and it always seems to be that people are trying to bring the physical world into the virtual world, when you can quite easily, in the meantime, before that happens, you can overlay some of the stuff that you're using, which you can't see, into XR world, ALTSPACE or whatever. And that's when I find problematic, because when I'm in ALTSPACE and I'm not feeling well, I cannot use it while I'm lying down. And that is a basic pain for me. I don't know if it's changed, because I haven't been here for a few weeks or something like that. But I don't know if I can actually move the whole space looking up at ALTSPACE. Like if I was in this session, if I can come and, if I was lying down, would I be able to use this session, come to this meeting?
Yeah, this is good feedback. Yeah. So are you in a headset right now, or are you on the computer? The desktop
I'm in a headset at the moment. So okay, I can probably use a laptop and probably do it, but it's still awkward. It's much easier in a headset. I'm in the Quest. Probably the cheapest one I can probably afford, and that affordability is another thing. But probably Quest is probably the cheapest one you can actually do an entry level. unless you go back to the old box, the VR box, putting your phone in there. But this is probably the cheapest. And if you were talking about other technologies that come in, and I think affordability comes into play, because when you're disabled or something, or you're in a place, affordability is very important, because in my case, it's a limited resource. So what can you do? It's made a lot of difference to me actually using ALTSPACE. But for productivity, it sometimes is a hindrance more than a asset. You can learn about all these stuff coming in, but you can never actually experience it as you would like to in reality. When you take the headset off, I can go and type, I can put up on a keyboard, I can use a mouse and use it, but I can't do it while I'm lying down. That's the main problem I have.
All right, you want to give that a try, Joel? You're muted.
All right, yeah, I think it's funny, Dylan and I just both crashed at the same time.
Sorry about that.
Okay. All right, so the question was, how do you succinctly, that is of most interest to people, is how do you access when you are in a laying down position? Now, laying down is complicated. There's laying down with your face up in a semi-sitting position. There's laying down on your side. On your side, we know that is a problem because the controllers don't know up and down. So your hands, with your using a headset, your hands will be, and your head will be tilted over to the side because it can't orientate. And I think that needs to be corrected. But if you're in a sitting laying down position, then it does orientate correctly, so you can experience it, but your avatar has a weird effect to it. But what are your other comments about people who are stuck in a laying down position using this equipment? And thank you very much, Prince, for the comments.
Yeah,
thank you
for sharing that. That's excellent. Yeah, it's something that I think I could start spitballing ideas to fix it, but really it's a matter of design. The designers for these systems, not only for the individual pieces of software, but for the systems as well, need to be thinking about this, right? And they need to be conducting user testing with people that are lying down, sitting up, people that are bedridden, and making sure that their systems work for this. I know one of the big vaunted uses of XR has been therapy and meditation and rehabilitation, and yet when the when the platforms don't work, if you're lying down, that's a huge failure to deliver on that promise.
Absolutely.
And so one of the big things that we're trying to do is get people from Microsoft and Facebook and Unity and the places that are in control of these platforms, and get them to do user testing with all kinds of people with disabilities, because otherwise it's only going to be useful for the relatively smaller than you'd think subset of the population that is fully able-bodied. There's so many people.
Population is growing with aging. We have there's some estimates that the average age, which is a hard thing to estimate in ALTSPACE, is actually something like 50 years old. And as the population gets older and older, there's going to be physical challenges that need to be overcome to allow them persistency and usage. So something we definitely need to take into consideration. So great point. And the onus goes back into the people creating the apps. They have to take this into consideration. All right, let's see what else is up. Do you have time for a couple more questions before you move on?
I would say let's do maybe one more, and then we can see if there's any time at the end, because I want to make sure we get into some of our XR access stuff too.
All right, Russell, you're up.
Am I on?
Yes, you're on.
There you are.
Okay. Well, we kind of touched on this a little bit. The company I work for, we do a lot of soft skills training and perspective taking experiences using immersive video. So obviously captioning is like a baseline that we'd like to be able to achieve. but some of the things that we do aren't necessarily programmatic. They're just video. So I was just wondering if you guys know of any either best practices or apps or companies who are providing that. Like, we have a workflow for a standard video, putting in captions, it's pretty easy. But what about if we just wanted to caption an immersive either 360 or 180 video? Because that's definitely something that we would like to integrate into everything that we do.
And before we get to your answer, we just had James Hendron from Equal Entry was here just, I think, last night, and we believe it was recorded, who talked about the same thing where it's voice captioning for the visually impaired,
Yep.
for the blind and visually impaired. So it isn't just about text; it's also about voice captioning.
Yep,
it's true. It's definitely a complicated challenge, because I'm sitting on the W3C immersive captions group, and we've got a prototype going right now that experiments with all kinds of things around trying to figure out, okay, if somebody's talking over here, how do we indicate that? How do we make sure that you can read the caption, but also know that the person is talking? Also make sure that you have all of the standard captions requirements in terms of letting users adjust the size and the contrast of captions. And so I think those standards are coming, and hopefully we'll be also working with some captioning companies and experts to figure out if there's a new type of like captions file format that we'll need to invent that includes things like speaker locations. So yeah, right now it's something that I think we're kind of working on creating those standards for, and hopefully we'll see soon. And in the meantime, unfortunately, it's kind of up to each individual developer to somehow try to create a system that works. And I think there are best practices for that. You know, the ALTSPACE captions here, other than the fact that they seem to keep going down off the bottom of the screen,
yes,
for me are not a terrible amount.
Yeah, if you're in 2D, hold down the right mouse button and scroll backwards. Then you'll see more of them.
Okay, let's see.
Hold down. Yeah, backwards. Again, not very intuitive. Hold down right mouse. Right mouse button, scroll backwards. It'll help you see a little more. But it's a kind of a nod. I feel like, do y'all feel like when it has a run off of text, you have to nod to see the end and nod to see?
Yeah,
a little bit.
Yeah, that little scroll backwards will help you see more of it.
Gotcha.
It's all because we talk too much. That's the main thing.
Yeah.
Endlessly, it fills up. All right, keep going.
I seem to have lost control over the slideshow when I had to rejoin, unfortunately.
Yep.
Is that something we can?
Joel, do you want to control it?
It's this red button next on the bottom right of the big screen, I think.
I don't know if Joel's with us. All right.
I don't think I have that either.
Okay, I just grabbed it. I'll do what I can. Yep.
Okay.
We may have to trade back, but I don't want to reload it because we're really close to the end. Okay, I think.
Yeah. Let's just go ahead and just drive it forward. Awesome. There we go. So I think next we're going to take a few minutes here and talk to you about what the XR Access Initiative is, and how you all can help contribute to making XR accessible, because this is absolutely a team effort. So go ahead and run us on to the next slide if you would, Rael. There we go. So XR Access we're an organization that we're founded in 2019 as a collaboration of Cornell Tech and Verizon Media, and also assisted by the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology, or PEAT, out of the Department of Labor. And essentially, we are a community at heart. We're a community that engages, connects, and influences the field of XR in order to build and share knowledge, skills, tools, user experiences, and leading practices to make XR inclusive of all, regardless of abilities. And we'll talk a little bit more what that means in the next couple of slides here. So our mission is to modernize, innovate, and expand XR technologies, products, content, everything else by promoting inclusive design in a diverse community that connects stakeholders, catalyzes shared and sustained action, and provides valued, informative resources. And that is a mouthful, but what it essentially means is that we are not trying to totally reinvent the wheel all by ourselves, right? What we are is a community and a catalyst. We are trying to bring together all of the stakeholders that need to come together to figure out this problem of XR accessibility, get them all in the same room, whether that's, obviously people with disabilities, organizations that represent them, the tech companies that control these platforms, people like yourself, educators that want to use VR and AR in your classrooms, the government agencies that are going to be responsible for regulating these technologies. We want to bring all of these people together and make sure that everybody is aware of the challenges that people with disabilities face, and the ways that we can work together to solve those challenges. So our vision is one where we want to see a world where inclusive design is just a core part of XR creation. Like, everybody knows that inclusive design development is important, everyone agrees, and there are widespread resources that are well kept, well maintained, updated routinely with new capabilities and new learnings from people with disabilities, to make sure that not only people care about accessibility, but they know how to act on it. We want to see a world where there's disability-led innovation, that it's not just able-bodied folks that are assuming they know what people need, but that people with disabilities have an active voice in shaping these, and are in the companies. They are part of the teams that are actually making these technologies. And finally, we want to see intersectionality as well. It's not just, disabled white guys. We want to see everybody, regardless of of gender, of race, of socioeconomic background. Definitely want to make sure that people who are in lower income areas can access these technologies, because otherwise you just get this kind of big generic blah, where we lose out on so many people's voices. I'll go ahead and skim through a few of these just very quickly. We have our stakeholders, as I mentioned. We're trying to reach out to a lot of different groups when it comes to platform makers, content creators, policymakers, just really anybody who is either has a disability, is interested in using XR, wants to use XR in their workplace, wants to has any type of ability to shape the landscape on what accessibility means and how the regulations on it are enforced. Anybody who falls into any of these big umbrellas is somebody that we want to have at our table. Now there's a lot that's going on here when it comes to accessibility. And obviously there's a ton of ways that this could potentially be organized and kind of shaped, and the Jenga tower could be built. But the way we've decided to do it is to divide the work that needs to be done into three broad categories. We have design, focus on kind of the necessity and desirability of accessibility, the technology aspect, which kind of focuses on the feasibility, and the business aspect that focuses on the viability. And we'll cover each of those here in turn as we look at our three work streams. So these three work streams, each of these work streams represents a group of people that meet once a month and talk through the challenges that they're facing in each of these fields, and ideally, take a whack at solving some of them and contributing to the progress in this field. So all of these work streams here, as we're looking at them, consider yourself, if any of these strike your interest, consider joining. Consider just dropping by one of the monthly streams. I think right now they're all sitting at between 15 and 20 people a month, but we want to build that up into a big community that can then kind of subdivide into groups that are capable of taking on each of these problems that we're considering. But the first group we're going to talk about is inclusive design of XR. This is idXR. Focuses on design and the kind of definition of what accessible XR means. Right, there's a lot of focus on user research, on talking with people with disabilities, and making sure that they understand the challenge that they face and the types of solutions that could potentially work for them. And then creating design guidelines and best practices and documentation that will help people understand what those people go through. Then our second stream on the next slide is accessible development of XR, or adXR. This group is focused on the technology that makes XR possible. and tries to make it easier for developers to implement accessibility into their projects. So we look at developer guidance. We look at things like the accessibility object model, how we can make tools like screen readers, for example, work with XR, and tries to create resources for developers that make it easier for them to implement accessibility in their projects. And then finally, we have business cases for inclusive XR. And this group is essentially about creating demand for accessibility in XR, and showing that accessibility is a valuable investment, right? Because I think it's easy for a lot of companies to effectively pay lip service to accessibility, to say, oh yes, of course we want our things to be accessible, but then not really give their teams the time and resources they need to actually make them accessible. And so the BCXR is essentially a tool for people to arm people, people like yourselves, maybe, educators who know that VR needs to be accessible, but haven't been able to get the people making the technology to listen to them on how important it is. We want to be able to make the business case that accessibility is a valuable investment, and one that is going to raise the value of your product, and make it worthwhile to put the actual time and money it takes to make these accessible, to devote that to these teams and these products. There's a big focus on training and training, events and conferences, things like this, meetings and communications. There's a lot of areas where XR is going to be used more and more in these coming years. And so, we just want to make sure that there's the financial case to make those accessible is there. And then finally, we have two other engagement teams. One is the coordination engagement team that I head up, that is essentially trying to listen to the people out in the community, understand what they need, inform the work streams of that, and then conversely take what the work streams create and make sure that it gets shared to the people that can actually make use of it. So really just trying to kind of interface between XR Access and the outside world. And then another really important one we have is the XR Access Research Network. This is something that we're still kind of in the process of booting up, but we want to make sure that we have people, all of the people that are working on these amazing use cases of accessibility in various parts of academia. There's a ton of really interesting research projects going on, and we want to make sure that the people that are doing those are connected to one another. They're connected to potential sources of funding and grants, and that the collaboration that can take place between all of these people working on these related topics is happening, and that knowledge gets its way into industry as well and doesn't just stay in the academia bubble. So I think we're very near the end of our discussion here. I think the last couple of slides we have are just on our upcoming XR Access Symposium. But I just want to take.
Let's skip ahead to that, and then we can take some questions.
Yeah. Why don't we come back to that? Joe, did you want to talk about the symposium, or should I?
I'll start, but yeah. So, well, first off, everybody is invited. It's Thursday, June 10th. Actually, Dylan, is the registration still open? We're still open, right?
I think it certainly should be.
Yeah. So it's open. It's Thursday, June 10th. It's all virtual. Again, we started this 2 years ago at Cornell Tech up in New York City. Last year we did it all virtual, and we're doing it again, as a lot of these things have gone. And then actually, I'm curious in the future if we'll go back. Curious, we'll go back or not, or if we're going to have sort of a hybrid. Anyway, come join us. We're going to be talking about all this stuff in more detail. If you want to go to the next slide, there's some info on our keynote speaker from the Department of Labor, which is great. Actually, is one of a DOL, the Pete, which actually, Dylan, you want to talk about this one because you're associated with that, right?
Yeah. No, this is the Chike Agu, who's the Chief Innovation Officer of the U.S. Department of Labor. We have coming to give our keynote, which is going to be an amazing speaker. We also have a ton of really great panels on design, on development, on research, and just I think a lot of just really phenomenal speakers on June 10th that are absolutely free. So if you have any interest in this at all, come check it out. Come network on. We'll have a Slack up to help people talk to one another and make connections between all of the different folks that are interested in accessibility. And it's gonna be a grand old time. So definitely come check it out. I think our next slide has a few other speakers, just a little preview of some of the great folks that are going to be on these panels. And then I think we had one more Q&A slide, but we can.
VR. Do I see educators in VR? No.
Oh well, we need to get you on there.
I love it. No, what a great group! What a great group of speakers. All right, beautiful. All right, any more questions for this amazing team? I have one while we're getting warmed up. If you'd like to ask a question, hit the raise hand button in the lower right corner. If you don't see it, right click or hit escape if you're in 2D. Now, VR offers an opportunity when it comes to training for empathy, to really walk in the shoes of someone else's experience. Are you working on any projects? Do you know of any that allows us to really walk in the shoes of someone who has these faces these challenges? Because I think that's going to drive much more connection when people understand that this is what it looks like, this is what it sounds like, this is what it feels like.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fantastic use case. I know the virtual human interaction lab at Stanford, I think, excuse me, has been working on some of those. I don't know if we've reached out to them directly yet. We'll certainly want them in our research network.
Yeah, start reaching.
But is that Bailenson? I'm trying to remember his name.
Yes, Jeremy Bailenson. Yes.
Jeremy Bailenson, I know is certainly a leader in that.
Yes, and so are others. But we need to because I think that it's all nice to talk, but until you walk it, you don't get it. You're making assumptions. Yeah. And that's the part that I think is dangerous when it comes to accessibility. You know, I have decades working with this, is when people make assumptions. Oh, well, people who are blind won't read the web. Excuse me? They're completely reliant upon the web. You know, people who can't see won't play video games. Are you kidding? They thrive in video games, you know? So we need to, the more that we can tap into that empathy, the more that people get it. And the more they get it, the more they're going to go put that at the first thought that they have in mind when they're developing. So
absolutely.
I hope you tell this is my passion project.
Yeah, and we'll keep taking a few more questions here, but if we could just throw
please.
It on the next slide for a moment.
All right.
I just want to make sure that people see before the turn of the hour.
You're up.
Yeah, let me see how to join. But yeah, let's get some more questions.
Yeah, let's go, sis.
Yeah, so I'm thinking like whole idea of the curb cutting. I think ALTSPACE is actually quite a good example of how accessibility concerns can affect every user. I'm thinking about the idea of bringing the physical into the virtual space. For me, sitting here with my headset, I can look around. If somebody else starts talking, I can look at them. If you look at the audience, about half of the hands are sitting straight down, so it tells me they're desktop viewers. They don't have the option to turn their heads. I'm sitting in an office chair, a swivel chair, and I can turn around. If I was sitting in a wheelchair, I wouldn't be able to turn behind me. And I think one of the problems that we have at the moment is that we are recreating physical geometry without individualizing to the user's needs. For example, if this was just a business meeting, why should I be seeing the same thing and everybody in the same place as people who are on a flat screen? They should have everyone in front of them. And I'm happy to have people behind me.
Yeah, no, and I think keeping track of how different people perceive the VR environment, making sure that's compatible with another is absolutely important.
And I agree. This is an opportunity to rethink how we can interact, right? Like you said, not just recreate the physical world, but how can you interact in different ways? And then when we go into augmented reality, maybe we can bring some of those new ways into the real world, which is I think is really fascinating, right? Like the stuff that you're doing, Dylan. Like how do we use this for accessibility on the other side of it? So yes, I mean that we might not have been thinking about that as much so far. At least with maybe the more serious applications. Obviously in games, like you kind of have this and we're like, well, you kind of give it like superpowers and stuff like that, which is a little bit different. But like, again, for ALTSPACE, what could you do here that you couldn't do in the real world? I think that there's more we can do there.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
All right. Now, does anyone else have any other questions they'd like to ask? We're at the end of the event. Is there anyone else?
All right. Well, if anybody does have any more questions, if you just go to the last slide, we have some more contact information for everyone. You can reach us on our website at xraccess.org. You can reach us on Twitter at LinkedIn at @xraccess. And if you want to just straight up email us, you can do it info@xraccess.org. And we'd really encourage all of you to reach out, come check out the symposium, can think about joining one of the work streams, and just, even if it's just to drop by just for one meeting and share your experiences and the challenges that you've faced. We'd really love to have you, because it really is going to take all of us to make XR accessible. So thanks so much for having us. Thank you, Laurel, for being a wonderful host. And we'll look forward to seeing everyone soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
And,
sorry, lost connection there for a second. All right.
oh yeah, no worries.
Sorry. Okay, so let's close this out. And I am so, honestly, this is so exciting for me, because every time we talk about it, we're tapping into one more heart, one more mind to make a difference. So thank you so much for all that you do. And we're going to be, do you have a list of all of the places that were shared in the slide deck for the resources to get involved? Could you make sure that I get it, and I'll make sure that it's on, or add it to it. Y'all should be in our Discord, right?
Sure.
Add it to our Discord under
yeah,
XR accessibility. That would be beautiful.
Absolutely.
Oh,
I'll make
yes.
sure to get
Yay.
it in there.
We'd
Yep.
love that, because we want to encourage as many people as possible to join those groups or support those groups or be familiar with what they're doing, because sharing the wealth, that's what we do.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you. This has been another Univirtual Experience Conference with the Virtual World Society and Educators in VR, bringing together experts and innovators in immersive education. And we are disrupting education around the world. This is day 25, and this is just one of many amazing presentations that exploring the full dimension of accessibility, of access, of educational types, of understanding presence and memory and learning experiences. It's an incredible experience. So please check it out. Do know that this was recorded, and all of our recording is done by volunteers. If it wasn't for our volunteers and our amazing sponsors, this would not happen. So the videos are coming up one by one. It's all volunteer activity, and they will continue through June. So keep an eye and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can be updated when the new videos show up. Want to thank our sponsors who make this possible, again, to keep this event free and open to the public. HP Virtual Reality and HP Higher Education, our Infinity sponsors. Our Galaxy sponsors, Engage and Advanced Education, who are changing the face of VR and XR. And all of our stellar sponsors, all of our regular supporters. Special thanks to Donna McTaggart of Let's Meet in VR, the event manager and director for Educators in VR and the Univirtual Experience events. And now, and all of our video crew, our moderators, and everyone who helped make this possible. So the event is finished. We're going to stick around for just a few minutes, and the video can end now. Also want to let you know that the